I think really we should just start with why I like federal sales.
I love that.
It's because I think a lot of people have an idea it's just munitions and guns and boats, and they don't realize the damn government buys everything. Shockingly, everything.
Toilet paper, software.
Toilet paper, berets, marijuana, ice cream, comic books. Like literally, I have seen all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so let's dive into that. Why don't we start there? Why federal sales in the first place? What should you be thinking about as you're making this decision in your career or thinking about maybe a job change? Why would you or why shouldn't you consider federal sales?
It's a good question. And I think the first thing that I've seen in my sales career is a lot of people maybe don't feel passionate or like they're really solving like big problems. Like maybe they're helping businesses make some good changes or simplifying processes and things. But what I have seen often is that people are looking to like maybe solve bigger problems. And you're talking about moving into the federal sales landscape, whether it's on the military side or what we call the federal civilian side, those are solving really big problems. And there's a lot of people who may have had that passion to serve in uniform in some way or even be a government employee, just wasn't in their cards. And this is a way for them to give back. I mean, there's a lot of entrepreneurs and businesses that were started by people who never served in uniform or were government employees that saw that they wanted to be part of a bigger kind of production, I guess, and solve bigger problems, in some cases globally.
Yeah, actually, I not thought that's a great point. Like the mission side of it, people that said, I didn't serve back then, maybe my head wasn't on straight, or I wasn't top of mind. And now, a little older, maybe a little wiser, and I've realized like there's value in combining passion and with work, right? And I'm passionate about making an impact, making a difference. And so you have to admit, yeah, I hear this a lot as I talk to people looking for jobs. They want to do something they care about. They want to do something they're passionate about. They want to sell something that actually makes an impact. And the federal space, you definitely make an impact. I think the federal space needs a lot of good people to come in and offer good insights. Let's be honest, the federal space, what do they say? They're 10, maybe 15 years behind from a technology perspective, the commercial space in some ways. Yeah. In other ways, they're very far ahead in maybe leadership skills and doctrine and their ability to train people quickly and help people become leaders. So in some ways, the federal space is way ahead, but in other ways that they're behind. Okay, so what else? The mission focus, why else would you consider federal?
I think one of the other most interesting things is the federal government literally buys everything. So in my experience here, there's the traditional stuff, maritime engineering and building vessels and ships and airplanes, and a lot of people think of munitions and tanks, but not a lot of people realize like every military installation and a lot of really big like government facilities, they have a chow hall, and someone is supplying that chow hall with a lot of ice cream. I have seen ice cream sales literally to the tune of like $75 million a year. Another one that I think is interesting is a niche comic book company, 15.5 million, right? I've come across a company that sells $15 million a year worth of berets to the Defense Logistics Agency. I don't know who is getting all those berets. I don't know if we're selling them back to the French. Who knows? But literally from rockets to spacecraft, satellites, to weaponry, to marijuana, the government, there's no non-niche product that they don't need. And to me, what that means is like, if you're passionate about, I don't know, paper products or tires or I don't know, you can find like a really cool place to be in helping other companies sell what they're doing. And then let's not even start with the technology side. Who knows undoubtedly how big that, like just the TAM alone, it's probably $50 billion a year. It's giant. So if you have a passion and there's an interest there, you can really find like your place and sell whatever you want to the federal government. It's awesome.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Being in the Navy, and now that you're presenting it this way, I'm thinking of myself like walking through the P-way of a ship and seeing like pipes and metal and the flooring, and like, someone had to sell all of these things. Like someone had to sell the software that we're using, the paper, the soap, there's everything. Yeah, it's incredible. I think it's safe to say there's likely not anything that the government doesn't buy. Which means, to your point, there's likely a place for you if you want to sell to the federal government and you have a specific desire to sell a specific thing. There's likely a place for you to sell that thing to the government. Okay, so we've got mission, we've got you can sell anything. Are there any like myths you're hearing around town about like federal government sales is this, is that? Like you're gonna get so rich selling to the government? Or what do you hear that people think that maybe some myths we should bust or some myths we should validate?
So let's talk about three myths. So one is very current, which was the $6 billion or $10 billion contract to Salesforce. Second, that it's all rigged and that run-of-the-mill companies can't win.
Yep.
And third, that there is a hack. So the first one, Salesforce made this giant $10 billion sale to the government, and everyone all over a lot of social media engagement were like, whoa, that sales rep proudly said, I'm out, like I quit. And so I was trying not to be like negative Ned and going in and being like, okay, so let's break this down. So in plain speak, what that sale looked like is it's a 10-year government-wide acquisition contract. So it's not like a single contract that was sold. And Salesforce received $10 billion in cash that day, and that one sales rep cashed out on their commission and quota for the year was gone. So these sales happen often, but it's not an immediate thing that is closed. There is in federal sales, especially on something that large, there's a team, right? And that deal did not just come from someone in the government calling Salesforce and being like, hey, we need, I don't even know how many licenses or whatever that included. That was a probably 3 to 5 year Ironman journey, not even a marathon. That took a lot of time. It took a lot of discovery. It took a lot of understanding really like the different missions that they're trying to hit. So yes, it sounds incredible, like someone rep won a $10 billion contract, but in reality, it's not real. But if you're listening to this and you're in a world where like your quota is $1 million, that's cool for a year. I've sold $3 million worth of contracts in 90 days. So think of the difference in numbers. Like we in the federal market can literally go after trillions of dollars. Like this, it's just wild to think, right?
Yeah.
So that's just one. That was not an easy sale. It didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen over a month or probably even a year. Myth two, it's all rigged. It may look like that, but the reality is, unlike the commercial sales world, especially in commercial tech, which has a lot of extra legal reviews and a lot more financial things, end user license agreements, service agreements, these things are just insanely big, just the proposals. And what is really going on and why it looks like the same companies win things all the time and it's not even worth like pursuing is people don't realize, again, it's an Ironman. Like these companies are getting into the programs and they're talking to the program managers and they're talking to the right people before really the government even knows what they want to buy. And they're asking questions like, hey, Andrew, have you ever thought about doing it this way? Like there's this new software we've got and I don't know if you're a good fit for it yet, but we're seeing like your 5-year picture and what the government is putting out as like mission essentials for the next 5 years. We think this might fit in there. And it's those early conversations, sometimes years before a contract actually gets released, that these companies are in there doing the sweat equity. Now, that's not to say that some companies don't sell licenses of XYZ software pretty easily. There's multiple ways that government acquisition happens, but it's not only that. I think people have this really shady idea that there's all this money kind of like being handed around backwards and behind closed doors. And it happens here in Military City, San Antonio. I see the news and people get arrested all the time for trying to cook like deals.
Yeah.
But it's not as prevalent as it once was. And then third, nothing is easy or fast. There's no hack in the government, right? There's really just understanding like mission, understanding the end user of who's going to use whatever it is you're selling, especially on the technology field. And the companies that seem to fast track any kind of thing, which is really like they went from zero to a contract in 18 months, or maybe if it's really interesting technology, 0 to 6 months. They got to the people that are going to be, as we say, boots on the ground. The person who's going to be using that, they got maybe a couple soldiers, airmen, marine sailors to actually play around. And then they got the feedback, and then they went in and used that user feedback to make those things like really critical to those people to where they couldn't live without it.
Right.
So there's no hacks, just like there's no hacks regularly in regular sales either. There are people that promise like, oh, get in government sales and you'll make all this kind of money in your first month. It's like, I doubt it.
Yeah, no, I love those 3 myths. The Salesforce one, you're absolutely right. That deal was in the making is actually a little over 6 years. My boss at the time started it and then handed it off to another rep who was a peer of mine. I'm not going to name any names, but they worked on it together over about a 6-year period. And it started with small. Like it started with the Army just buying Salesforce for recruiting. And not like all of recruiting, just like a few pockets of recruiting. Like let's give it to 50 recruiters and see how it goes, right? Let's do that for 6 months, a year, whatever. Went great. Okay, cool. Let's buy more. And then what else can we use it for? That's maybe related to recruiting. So to your point, really your third point, it starts small and grows over time. So this $10 billion 10-year contract, actually I think it was a $6 billion or $5 billion.
Yeah.
Whatever. It doesn't appear just like out of thin air. Like these things have been in the works for a long time, a lot of sweat equity. But I do think that the amount of work you do many times is commensurate with the reward. Like you work on a 6-year deal, you could stand to make a nice paycheck, 7-figure paycheck on that deal. Heck, maybe 8 figures, who knows? But it's hard. It's a lot of work, a lot of ups and downs and dealing with the government. There's so many starts and stops. There's so many like, yep, this is the plan. Oh wait, never mind. We're going this direction. We'll get back to you in 6 months. And doing that for years, right? So I'm proud of the team. They did awesome. But now also you could argue like this is where the real work starts because the contract is essentially now a license to go really sell more. Yep. There's no obligation that they have to fulfill the $6 billion contract. Typically there's a floor, right? Typically there's a guaranteed amount.
Yeah, there's usually a minimum, especially in IDIQs and GUACs. So you're right, like it's a $6 billion ceiling. That's how much the government can actually put charges onto that. And usually there is a minimum. When I won Jets DLA, that was a $11.6 billion contract. Folks, I didn't actually win it like my company, but we are one of many participants that won a seat on the Jets DLA IDIQ. I think we got a $6,000 immediate, like every company that won that got a $6,000 from day one, which is pretty rare. There's other ones that people might have seen, one that's associated with Golden Dome, right? So Shield. That one is a $500, and that's the largest government contract that's ever been out. So I obtained that one. That was $175 billion, largest IDIQ or government-wide acquisition contract ever. And every company that's on both the tier 1 and the tier 2 awards, I think they all get $500 at the end of 10 years. If they nothing else, they get $500, which wouldn't even cost the amount of time that it took us to put, even though it was a minimal proposal down. It's funny you said that it took 6 years. A lot of people wouldn't even think of this, but that's 2 different presidencies. And that's almost like one full presidency and one half of another one. So when you said things can change, like just look at the changes that we've seen. That's another thing that can show up, things can be going one way, and not to get like morose, but things like 9/11 can come out of absolutely nowhere and change the entire course of maybe the government and federal spending habits, where maybe some things get pushed back and all of a sudden there's a priority on way more other things that you just happen to be in. And now it's like you've got a license to sell everywhere and it's easy, but that's not usual.
It is unpredictable. I think a lot of people thought that when Trump got elected this most recent term that spending was going to skyrocket for defense specifically. And what really happened was Doge. And people got doged left and right, which meant that contracts, Accenture got let go, IBM, the Lockheeds, like some of these major primes and major consultancies had these giant contracts with the government, and the government's forced to cut spending, and they got to do it any way they can. They're going to start cutting some of these contracts. They're going to start cutting people. And so that was unexpected. Like I certainly didn't see that coming to the extent that it did. But now here we are. When was Doge? 4 years?
About a year, some change.
I feel like we're out of the Doge period largely, right? Like we're seeing like ripple effects of it, but we're not seeing like major cuts like we were back then. Which brings me to a point of like, I feel like the federal government normalizes, like it has a normal. But there's waves, there's highs, there's lows, and the people that are most successful in the federal space selling are the ones who just stay a long time. Like if you're gonna get in the federal space, can you talk to us a little about the value in like just stay there versus bouncing back and forth, like federal for 2 years, commercial for 4?
Yes, and before I get there, I will say that Doge was a lot more pronounced in like budget cuts and contracting. If we go back to the history, probably the last 50 years of different presidents coming in with their different kind of focuses, a lot of things like money changes and transitions. I wouldn't say maybe President Trump's way of doing it is a little bit more open, and that's what he campaigned on. But I don't think we've ever seen the level of just like accelerated cutting and contracts being hacked apart and the visibility of that. But we have seen this consistently in most presidents' tenures. So Doge is just a lot more out there.
I think what also highlighted it and made it a little bit more in people's faces, and really it was newsworthy is what it was, because you're right, every president cuts here, cuts there a little bit, but it's not necessarily newsworthy. What made this newsworthy was Elon Musk comes in, leads the Doge party,
chainsaw.
Yeah, brings a lot of other like high profile CEOs and founders with him. And we got all these civilians who are coming in and being like, we know how to make cuts, like we can do this. And I think a lot of people, it was very different. I don't know that's ever been done before or anything like it. And so I think that's what really made it more pronounced and newsworthy. And it was the front page for a while was the Elon Trump thing. But as a seller, I think the good sellers recognize, okay, like how do I pivot? How do I adapt? What else can I do? Let's not panic. And you get through it. And the long haul matters. Having the long vision, specifically in federal sales, because the sales cycles are so long, it matters. And you can be rewarded handsomely for sticking around.
Yeah.
Also, it's gaining the expertise in one domain, like knowing the Army well, knowing the Air Force well, building relationships there, being able to see a program of record from like 0 to 1, like there's value in that. So
a lot of that is really predicated on just knowing a sub-agency, right? And like you said, watching a company or a program start from the color of money, which is usually the first phase is RDT&E funding, and seeing where that's going to go, how the government is actually going to maybe take that further into O&M funding and ultimately a program of record, and understanding that process. So sellers can come in, and if they have a really good understanding of basically how budget cycles work, which is really the secret to government sales, because a lot of things that are brand new or novel are not sold to the government in giant contracts, 25, 50, 75, $100 million contracts. Generally, they start in smaller increments. It's kind of like a weird pilot And then once maybe the government sees where they really want to pivot and build in these kind of programs, then they go and move down the funding stages. So that takes a long time to really understand how that works. And it's either self-discovery and self-learning, or you get some mentors who understand that and can point you to things. Your second point of having the focus, right? Merit, Navy, Army, Marines, whatever, that definitely helps, because as we know, officers and uniformed folks making like really big decisions, they're moving in and out every 3 years. But the civilians who are in those offices, they might be there for an entire career. And so there is a lot of relationship building and people seeing your face pretty consistently at certain conferences, and them seeing you at webinars and industry days, and they begin to see you. And obviously that helps to really, I wouldn't say open doors, but that familiarity of you being there and a constant in their kind of world. Once they begin to see who you are, like that really helps.
Yeah, no, that's good. Okay, so we've been discussing why federal sales, some considerations. We talked about some myths. We talked about the value in the long game and staying for a while. What have we missed?
I think understanding like the structure of most government sales teams is good, because BD means a very different thing than BD with commercial sales. Yeah, and then there's capture, and then there's understanding proposals, working on those kind of teams and how that all works.
That's a really good point. Why don't we define the terms? Like, what is sales, government sales? And would you argue BD falls under government sales, or it's a completely different function? And then, yeah, what is the difference between sales and BD? I see BD and capture as synonymous, like you can interchange those two words, or do you see it as something different?
It depends on the size of the company. Because like the Lockheeds, the Heritage Primes, like their capture managers don't usually, they go to conferences, but it's not their job. Whereas the BD folks, they're going to industry days, they're going to conferences, they're getting into offices. If their name's recognizable, they're doing the business development, and then they're feeding the capture teams like, here's what we're shaping right now. Here's what we know is coming down the pike. Here's what the long range forecasts are showing. And then capture takes it, and that's where they really do like almost an internal discovery on, is this an effort we want to go after? Does it follow our strategy and priorities? Do we have the past performance? If not, how do we get the right teams in place? So to me, capture is more strategic, and the BD is more like sales. But most people in BD in the government, they're not making cold calls,
right?
Because they don't think it's useful. They're not sending out like spam can emails either. They're given a territory, Army, Navy, Marine Corps, whatever, and they're given key contacts to like get in front of, and then they just go and do their thing. And then once they think they have a possible sale coming down the road, then they hand it off to capture. And then they're still in that piece, but really it's a beautiful thing because they hand it to capture, and then they're off going to look for the next 2-year win down the road.
Yeah. I think also it's worth mentioning that there's going to be different types of acquisition processes. Like, for example, what you're talking about, this workflow or this process of sales, essentially creating opportunities, right? They're not necessarily responding to RFPs or anything like that. They're just like creating an opportunity that didn't exist yesterday, making it real, validating it. The federal government says, actually, yeah, this is great. I'd love to go further and talk about this. And they come to verbal agreement, like, yeah, we're going to buy this. Then we hand off to capture. Capture does their thing, submits formal proposals and so on. When I was at Salesforce selling software, I did that whole thing myself. Like, I would go create an opportunity that didn't exist yesterday and take it all the way to close. And they would buy it, right? We didn't have a capture team. Well, that's not true. We do have a capture team, but their job was to go after large RFPs that were being put out on the street. Whereas our job was to go create opportunities from thin air, right? Mm-hmm. Or expand existing opportunities, or recognize the information we are gathering from RFPs, like what are the requirements, what does the federal government say they need, and then how can we respond and talk to them about this or there's something related.
That might almost be like a one. to go to that level of detail, but we can talk about like how the government buys stuff. Because I think that's unique because there's simplified acquisitions. There's OTAs, there's CSOs. I probably wouldn't dive into the SIBRs because that's like a whole different thing. And most people aren't going to get into federal tech sales working on the SIBR side of things. And then there's traditional formal solicitations and all that.
Yeah, so why don't we go super high level and as far back as you think is appropriate, talk about like where funding comes from, how it's determined, who gets it, and typically who are the buyers of things that our audience would be interested in, assuming our audience is more like tech, sales folks, or defense tech even. How should they be thinking about the flow of money through the federal government? And what level of detail should they know? Should they be experts? Do they just have to be dangerous? And why?
Okay, this will be interesting. So one of the things I think a lot of people should understand, like how does money actually travel from the budgetary idea all the way to finally a company being awarded a contract and the money actually being exchanged, because this is generally usually like a 3-year cycle. Because in the easiest simple term is the government knows what they need to procure based on lots of different variables, usually a 3-year buying minimum, sometimes a 5-year. Now it's turning into 7 years with munitions. So the government understands where they're going to be and what they're going to need to procure. And so there are basically the teams that put together a budget request. And that budget request ultimately goes through multiple different parts of our legislative group. So Senate, House, and Congress all have to like put their stamp of approval on a budget request. Then ultimately it goes to the president's desk. They sign off on it. So right now we are, for anyone watching this in the future, we're in March of 26. And right now they're still trying to figure out like how they're going to put together the 2027 budget. Figured that we're 1 quarter in, we still don't understand. And that request is for 1.5 trillion in addition to, that's a defense request. So all this was started years ago by the procurement teams that understood and started looking at what we, as the government, federally, across FedCiv and the Department of War, need to procure. But yet that actually started 2 years ago. They started looking at things like how many jets do we have and how many federal subsidies that we can give to farmers, and like every little piece of like the American experience that plays a part of this, I don't know, holistic sense that sell things to the government, from soybeans to everything else we've already mentioned. Someone planned for all of that, right? And the good news is it's all public.
Right.
And like Google's your best friend. I'm sure, I don't know where LLMs will be at some point in time, but you can use them as well to find all of these budgetary documents. And why this matters is if you're in a maybe youngish company that's got some R&D funding, what you really are trying to look at is a big picture of a 3 to 5 year spread. And you can go and look at in the comptroller's budgets for all the different branches of the military and other parts of the federal government. You can see where they're putting money and aligning money towards mission, towards things that they want to accomplish, things that they want to build, and it's all public. And this is what takes maybe a so-so good salesperson to the next level, and at least understanding the federal side of things. Because if you understand how budgets are created, how they're passed, and then a lot of people have heard about pork being thrown into bills and all this other stuff. Well, it's true. Folks need to make sure that people are working meaningfully in their states and their cities and things like that. So their constituents will also ask for little cutouts to make sure that people are at work wherever they are. And so these things all get tacked onto these bills and budgets. And if you understand how all of that kind of interrelates, just even at a big picture, you're like 50% smarter than a lot of people that maybe don't understand how things are funded. So company gets R&D money year one. As the salesperson is moving that, because usually you're going to keep a relationship with who you're talking to in the government. So there's usually a program manager that got to make a decision, and then depending on who you're selling to in the federal government, maybe there's a uniform or a senior level GS that also got to put their stamp of approval on it. Ultimately, it goes to the person who can actually issue funding, and that is a contracting officer. So we didn't talk about this myth, but a lot of people have this magic idea that, let's say they know Admiral so-and-so, and they've got a really great company, lots of past performance. They sell really cool stuff that maybe I can go call my uncle, the Admiral, and be like, hey, Uncle Bob, I need a contract. And Uncle Bob can somehow magically make money appear because Uncle Bob has no ability other than maybe a $25 limit on his own recognizance to spend for his office. Only the contracting officers are authorized by Congress to issue a contract to anyone.
Right.
So that is a myth. There's no magic way to get anyone to give you money because contracting officers can refuse, and they can go straight to head. I don't know, I'm making this up, but Vice President so-and-so, they can be like, sir, you can't direct me to make a contract with a company.
Right.
Only Congress can. So you get the contract from the contracting officer. That is one of the people, along with a long line of other kind of key opinion influencers and key opinion leaders that you need to make sure that you maintain relationships with, because as your software, as your technology moves down the line, those are the people that can help you move the funding from R&D, operations and maintenance, S&T, to programs of record. And what a program of record really means is it's actually written into the congressional budget, which means it's in there. Like, it can't be taken away. And once Congress passes it, like, that's money for years, usually 3 to 5 years at a minimum.
What are some things, if you're starting out, let's say you got a job in federal sales and you're starting out, knowing what you know now, what are some things you wish you knew on day one that would affect like how you'd approach like a new federal sales job?
So how I would approach a new federal sales job on day one, the good news is the company is going to give you a lot of learning and education about who they sell to, what they do, and then you're more than likely going to be given a focus, whether it's in the military side of things or the Fed Civ side of things. So the number one thing you should do is go learn as much as you can about those offices. And they all have missions. It doesn't matter if they're in the defense side of things or the civilian side of things, because the worst thing you can do, and I didn't have this happen, but I've talked to a lot of retired folks that brand new salesperson came in, even a seasoned one comes in, and they sit down and they go, Andrew, tell me what your challenges are. To which they would respond to, well, what's the mission of our office? And if you can't answer that, even in your own layman's terms, it's over. Like,
100%.
That's over. So the first thing to do is, once you are given your territory or your focus, spend the time to understand and learn about what they're trying to do. It's all public. It's usually 3 to 5 years of strategy. And there's usually a lot of historical that you can go back and look. And that was the first thing. Unlike the commercial space, folks really like you to know who they are, what they do, what they're really passionate about as a mission focus. And if you can nail that, like, your first couple meetings moving forward will be cake.
Yeah, I know thy customer. I think that is just foundational sales, whether you're selling door-to-door roofs or you're selling multi-billion-dollar contracts to the government. I think everyone wants to know that you know them and that you're at least aware, you have some foundational knowledge of like the ecosystem I live in, the world I live in, the problems I'm facing. And it could be, if it's day one, I think a lot of knowledge, education, research, on the customer and specifically the customer's problems, right? Like, what are the things that we actually do to help them? I tell people all the time as they ask me, like, hey, how do I ramp? What are some things I should focus on? And a lot of companies these days are like, all right, you're going to start with obviously week one's like admin, get your laptop, meet a few people, blah, blah, blah. And then they jump right into like product knowledge, like learn our product, learn how we do what we do or why our product's awesome, blah, blah, blah. I think that's fine. I would couple that with you have to know the customer. If it was up to me, I would say know the customer first and continue learning the customer. Your product knowledge it doesn't naturally arrive, but as you go out and talk to customers, they're going to ask questions of you that's going to force you to go learn about your own product. They're going to say, I have this problem, blah, 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 ABC, I've had for so many weeks or so many months or years. How does your product work? Can it help me? So I think learning the customer is super important, specifically their problems. Obviously, knowing our own product is really important as well. But I think people just overlook the value in showing up to a meeting and instead of saying, hey, what are your challenges? Say, I'm pretty sure your challenges are this, this, and this. And you might not be 100% correct, but you're probably 80% correct, right? That's so much more powerful to come in with a point of view or an assumption that needs to be validated because it immediately tells the customer, like, all right, this person's done the research, they're prepared, they know us. I'll talk to this person. All right, maybe they can actually help me.
Yeah, I'll leave it with this. There are a lot of agencies and sub-agencies that offer one-on-one engagements at industry days and conferences. And usually at the top of the engagement form, it says, do your homework. Like,
right.
It is beautiful because in the government, you can do it. And it's not hard. It doesn't take a lot of time. Obviously, you've got to read it or however you get that versus the commercial side of things where it's all like hypothetical. But the government, you can find it and they publish it. It's not hard to find. And so know your homework. That's the best place to begin.
I like it.
I love it.